previous I worked in Oracle and API startups. And please welcome my guests, and they will introduce yourselves. Please, Jirka, start.
So hi everybody, my name is Jirka. I work at Product Board as a director of engineering, and we build a tool for teams to understand user needs and prioritize what to build next.
Hi guys, my name is Pichlik, aka Dage. I'm VP of Engineering here at Ataccama, and we help companies make better decisions based on the quality data.
Hi, I'm Borek. I'm a CTO at ShopTet. ShopTet is the largest Czech e-commerce platform, serving about the same GMV as Alza, but distributed to around 30,000 e-shops. So like many small e-shops instead of a large one.
Hello, I'm Vilda. I work in Oracle in the OCI in the cloud division. We do AWS. Like TLDR.
Sure. Vilda, can you give us a heads up about you build it, to run it, how we get with idea, and what is origin of this model?
So the you build it, you run it thing comes from AWS actually in like 2006. Was it 2006? The CTO actually brought this up, and basically is the idea that the team that actually builds the software also runs the software. I think most of the people do it this way, especially in the SaaS, the software delivered over browser. That's what most people do anyway. I don't know what else to add to it. And then it brings everything else with it, like how you do these things. Yeah, and it becomes very complex.
There are many topics that we can discuss, and I think that we can start with something that's are common for everyone. That's some organization, how companies are structured, how you structure engineering versus operations, and how you look on that problem from your perspective as you going larger and larger. That's, I think, quite nice, and we see how different companies looks on this issue, and how our current situation you. Dagi, can you start?
Sure. Historically, we have two teams. We had engineering and the operations team, and we slowly moving toward, let's say, more DevOps-like way, that we want to make a shift left on the operation responsibilities, at least from the let's say perspective of the observability and ability to provide better service to our customers. So we are, let's say, at the beginning of transition, like shift left from the dedicated operations team to get more responsibilities on the shoulders of the developers. I would say that and probably that's gonna be very common, or say not only for us but also for you, is such kind of the mind gap that the people from the ops team and the engineering team naturally build a wall between, and that's it generates all kind of the problems, like, okay guys, we need, for example, better sizing, we need better alerts, dashboards, and from the other sides you can hear like, oh, we don't understand how the things works under the hood, how you provision the services, how actually the application should behave once deployed into Kubernetes. So by this design, we for sure see all of this kind of the problems, which are, from my perspective, are caused by this wall that was built between operations and engineering teams.
Thanks, Dagi. Jirka, how your perspective?
So at Product Board, we started with a huge Ruby monolith, and how we solved the issue of running the system, running the monolith, was actually appointing a group of the senior Ruby engineers who were on call for the system, and they were looking after it. Now, for various reasons, we started migrating things away from the Ruby monolith to a set of Kotlin services. And obviously that brings the challenge of how you organize your on-calls around it. And we settled on the actually you build it, you run it approach. So there will be teams of engineers built around the services that they own, and the alerts will be like routed to the teams that actually have the domain context that they build the services. So we try to follow the principle that I believe the podcast is trying to preach. We are right now at the beginning. Mostly we still rely on the Ruby monolith, and most of the alerts we are handling are still within its realm. But so far so good with the implementation. We decided to do alerting based on SLOs mostly, which is also a new mindset, new approach that we decided to implement, to try out. And yeah, maybe a couple of weeks, couple of months from now, we can discuss how it went for us.
Yeah, that's super good, and it was. I worked in product board last year too. That's, I think that super good that way that we trying there move it. That's working. That's super good. Borek, how you are doing that?
Yeah, I think ShopTet went through some phases similar to other companies. When it started and when it was around 10 people in the IT, it was mostly developers. Some of them obviously could even run Apache servers, things like that. So, but only a few of them. Most of it was developers. When the company grew to around, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, some special roles focusing only on the infrastructure came into the company. And at that point, I would say that a similar thing happened as Dagi described, and that there was some sort of operations team and development team, some sort of wall between them. What we are trying right now, we are about 60 in the engineering right now. So again, similarly to other companies, we need to move more responsibility, everything back to development. So in the future, hopefully the operations team will not grow. They will actually focus on the infrastructure, but all the metrics, on-calls, things like that will move slowly to development teams.
May I tell you one story? It goes back to time, I think 2011, 2012, when I was working for Good Data. And that was the first time when I was living this you build it, you run it transition. And I would say, going back in time, it was quite naive how we executed that, or how I perceive that from what I know now. And the main mistake, and please do not make the same mistake as we did, was like we said, okay, the dedicated operation team doesn't scale. We need to, move the responsibilities left on the engineers, and we will start next month. So what happened immediately, that the people were really frustrated, being wake up on call for at, I don't know, 2 a.m. or so. So as we decided to implement this let's say shift left on call duties in Ataccama, was we have to make our own homeworks, because there is a lot of things that need to be prepared in advance. How you will schedule people, how the alert looks like, how the monitoring looks like. Are there any let's say run books or things that engineers on calls can do if they are waken at 2 a.m. So I would say, like, if you consider a shift left of any operation responsibility from your existing operation teams to your engineering teams, please make your homework and analyze what are the things which are engineers capable to do it. Don't do it in naive way, like, guys, you are now responsible for on call, go for it.
And I would say not just analyze, but also make sure to practice whatever process tooling you put in place. Make sure people have enough time and a safe space to try it out, so that when you have a real production incident, people are not struggling to figure out, okay, where's the documentation? What's the process I should be following? That should be like in everyone's memory. And they should focus on the mitigation of the incident, on the communication coordination, not figuring out okay, how do I create a Zoom bridge? How do I talk to support? How do I pull in more people? How do I escalate to management? These kind of things that should be already practiced before the real incident happens.
Yeah, and it's always good to have good tools on automation about on-call things and others. But I will ask Vilda, how that scale in that big company that you have hundreds of teams?
I mean, in OCI, we do it. We do the you build it, you run it. So the teams that are delivering certain service, like, I don't know, object storage, which actually is like 5 teams, because there's like a storage part, there's a metadata part, and so on. It becomes complex. They always own everything. They really own like back down to the box. And if they need, and if it goes below, above their like skill level, there's a team that actually is like, oh, you can call in kernel team if needed. You can call in a team that actually is like delivering the operating system and so on. But they really own everything. And there is a structure and a hierarchy, and of course, like super heavy process compared to many other places where you basically follow, and it surprisingly works. Like, that's one of the things that surprised me the most, was it actually works in the scale of 10,000 people, right? But you have a dedicated team that actually does the Zoom bridges. You don't have to figure out anything. You just click this button, it will appear, somebody will pull you in, and there will be the relevant people in the call all of a sudden. It's like, wow, like no matter what the time zones, everything. So, and there are teams who are dedicated just to figure out like how to make this process faster, easier, and so on. So there are like metrics gathered on how fast you can get people on the call and stuff like that. So I'm totally convinced on this approach since I actually haven't started as a developer. So I was carrying a pager back in 90s when I was doing half like development and half operations for a cashier system in Carrefour. That's a French Tesco. And so I'm kind of like biased. I was like, yeah, everybody understands this. Like, sure, like, you know, like what runbook is. I was carrying, this was the thickness of the book I was carrying around, right? Like, that was it. Like, and so I never thought about it before. Like, today I realized, like, oh, I'm actually like in this you build it, you run it world, like since day one. So I kind of like assumed a lot of things. And I've learned, like, no, that's not given, that you have this approach and you kind of like own everything. And if you don't know, you escalate. And that's one of the things that I think is important. And that's where the process, in, for example, in OCI exists, is that when you don't know, you always have a path to escalate. In some sense, you can escalate up to CTO or even like CEO or whoever, right?
Yeah, I think that's very different if you joining the company that have that culture from beginning or for a long time, that already that process exists. As for example, Jirka was in Google, was a SRE, and for example, we joined both API that Lucas running, and we have here. And that was from the beginning, in a few people running this you build it to run it approach from that beginning for whole time that startup exists, and we don't need to make transitions. Yeah, but that's, I think, only a few little percent of companies who are from beginning or were founded by experienced people who pursue this from beginning of.
Like maybe all small teams that start with just developers, they have to do this, right? And they have to run it themselves, but they have no customers, so they can sleep at night. And if there's an incident, it impacts no one, right? So I'm not sure if all the companies can continually do it from the very smallest to the large, because in case of ShopTet, it was actually sort of this curve where it was you build it, right? Of course, who else? Then you hire maybe some special operations engineers, things like that. And then you wonder, like, is this good actually? And maybe you try to shift more responsibilities and build processes, things like that. But it certainly wasn't like a flat curve. It was change.
And I think if you decide to go for you build it, you run it, you really should start checking the capabilities of the people and their willingness to do it during the interview process, because you don't want to end up in the situation when I don't know 80% of your engineers refuse to do on calls because of you.
Yeah, exactly. I think
haven't
that complicate hiring.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
can ask Lucas. That was super complicated hire someone into API. Yeah.
And I'm not sure how the situation evolved, but when I was hiring for good data, when I was individual contributor, it was, let's say, 1 out of 10 developers has any experience with the debugging and troubleshooting JVM. So I asked question, okay, JVM is frozen. How you even understand what is happening inside? So things like that, sending quit signals, etc., was complete known unknown for them. So I was so surprised, and I don't know, maybe that's a question for you guys, how the situation evolved on the market, but just only tiny fraction of the developers were capable to do basic Linux stuff and not going into JVM and so on.
Yes, situation evolves, and at least from my experience and what we have discussions with Wilda, quite often it's worse. Yeah, that's usually, you can see that there are in our field are many experienced people, but in field we joining new people and after university or something that are more that number of seniors are getting slower and slower, and that not smaller and smaller, that the group is small, not bigger.
I wanted to say what will happen once half of these people will be replaced by ChatGPT.
Yeah, at least we will see. Maybe
I think that actually will solve a lot of problems. I'm looking forward. Like, I don't like to write code, right? It's boring. I just want to say like, oh, I need to cover this, blah blah blah. Like, so I'm looking forward for that.
Yeah, and I think that AI is not exactly what you needed. That you don't need something super smart. Yeah, that can be just automated, and gather all the data and make, I think, heuristic analysis, and can be enough, yeah, for 90% of issues in productions.
So maybe I can share experience from OCI where we have like a lot of people coming from school. Like there's I don't know how many a year, and we have a quite heavy like learning period, like 6 months. You basically just learn because you basically know nothing. Oh, you know how to code, but that's the least of the skills we need, right? Actually, right? Like, oh, you need to understand how, at least to some degree, understand how the operating system works. Like, oh, and when I say networking, most of the people go like, what? Did somebody say something? Right. But that's the part of the job, like understanding, oh, how I troubleshoot basic networking, how I troubleshoot, how I can detect like hardware failures, like what I'm supposed to do, or, basically just basic debugging takes months to like really learn, so that when it's like 2 a.m., you're able to pull it off. So I don't think that this approach is actually easy. I think it actually requires, I think the coding is the easy part.
Agree. Yeah.
How long does it usually take before you let an engineer to start surveying on call? Jirko, if in your case, do you have such a period?
Well, in our case specifically, it's tricky. I've been talking about the situation that we have the monolith, which has its own on-call rotation. In this case, the on-call rotation consists of 4 OGs with the company pretty much forever. And we haven't been able to onboard new people into this rotation for a long time. So bit of a tricky situation. Let's see how it looks like with the new rotations for the new services based on Kotlin. What I think is important is to make it clear that being able to hold on call for your services should be a part of the responsibility. So we made it a part of the career ladder that from a certain level, you need to be comfortable leading incident response, and you need to be senior enough to be able to troubleshoot why the service is misbehaving and implement a fix, basically remediate the issue, and maybe leave like the proper fix until later. But you need to be able to put the service into like a working state.
Yeah, and that's happens now about on-call in general, and we can maybe discuss this into more details, that it's different in different countries, and that approach can be by team, have separate on-call. You can have multiple layers of on-call, primary, secondary. You can have split on time zones. If you have teams, for example, in Pure Storage, we have big development center in Prague, but in US too, and we splitting on-call by 12 hours. 8 to 8 here and 8 to 8 in Mount View. That's easy for us. That nobody working in the night. And how are, for example, in Oracle did that?
It actually is depends on the teams. They basically, because they build it, they run it, they decide how they structure on call. So there are teams who have like, they can follow the sun, and they basically just working hours, and that's covered. It's fine. They even have, some of the large teams have really like dedicated SRE teams, like where people are basically responsible for this, for the running of the service. So they have, and there's of course like a lot of discussions on what's the contract between the development and the SREs and so on, like what works and what not. But in general, it mostly goes, oh, you're weak on call, like 24/7, and then usually like a couple of days off. Because it's like you handle like 100 incidents or something, so you don't sleep much.
Really, you have
Sorry, once again?
shit ton of the incidents, like for every shift.
Sometimes it's really horrible. Sometimes it's fine. Like you never know. It depends on customer workloads. You know what happens on the internet. It's like all kinds of things. So, and there are teams like virtual networking where they have 6 people on call, basically, because with so many regions, there's going to be some outages always, and somebody needs to attend to it, and nobody wants the network to go down completely, right? So you kind of like start acting quite early in the game, like, hey, it's just one customer sees problem or two. Oh, we're better to look at it so it doesn't escalate, right? So there's, for example, 6 people in an on-call.
Do you have any metrics for like how many incidents are acceptable per day for a rotation?
Yes, well, but and it all again depends on the teams, so it's not like prescribed. But there are like general rule of thumb is like the big incidents, there shouldn't be more than like 20 a week. Right? That's the goal. That's the aim for everyone, which is something that people can handle. And if it's a service that actually needs more, it usually goes like, oh, we get more people in if that's needed.
So just for the first question, we have operation team here in Prague, in Toronto, and Vietnam, just for the follow the sun. But the engineering is mostly here in Prague. But I wanted to say that one downside of having this, split responsibilities between the operations team and the engineering team is that, or what I see from the alerts that the operation people gets, is they don't understand how the actual infrastructure alert, affects the overall user experience. So we can say like we built a solid basement of the infrastructure alerts, but it tell you really just only small, let's say, truth about how the application behave towards the user needs, and that's the, by the way, that's the naturally driven by the wall which is between the operations team and the engineering team.
But that is good what Jirka mentioned, try adapt the SLO alerting, that's what product board doing, and I think it's very nature way, how you can put customers on that alerts, and you really looking for the behavior. Sometimes that platform can have issues, but customers doesn't have, yeah, and vice versa. Yeah?
I think there's important, like one other important aspect, which maybe is not obvious, is that not all customers are equal, like at least in Oracle case, right? So, and I think it actually probably true to most companies. There are like more important customers, and if they are affected, it's just one customer, but maybe it's like 10% of your revenue, right? And that is something special.
And the opposite applies. Like if you have a bunch of infrastructure alerts firing, but there is no customer impact, then there's absolutely no reason to wake somebody up.
Yeah, exactly.
And the worst thing that might happen to you is that your customer knows about your problem sooner than your operations/engineering team, which happens.
Yeah, that's.
Well, it shouldn't though. Right?
I remember in IPR we almost always know better than our providers. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, really. Our monitoring upstreams was usually better than theirs.
By the way, I recall one story here from Ataccama, and hopefully nobody will kill me. And it was like during some kind of I think was customized to Helm migration for some reason, we didn't started one service, one AI microservice, but the overall product continues to work. So nobody realized that this service was shut it down and was, you know, read like, I don't know, like that chair, and nobody cared because it has zero impact on the customers.
Mm-hmm.
So even such a stories happen.
That's nice. Actually, about the impact, it's one of the hardest things for us to evaluate. So when some server returns 500s, that's easy. But what's the true impact? Even after the incident, it's often hard to tell what really happened.
Always key question on if you fire any incident, what is impact? Is that key question that you have to answer, and should be that key result that you needed from post-mortem. And I want to ask our audience, do you have some questions that, or we will continue, but if you have any question that you can give us.
So I have one or maybe two questions. I heard a lot about against, let's say you build it, you run it. One thing is cost. Basically, from 30 engineers on call, you now have 150, and you have to pay the engineers to have them on call. And the second, I don't know if it's like valid, but there may be some legal regulations like developers can't touch production code because customer data is there. How do you solve these issues? Thanks.
That was great questions.
And so I actually worked in such an environment, and actually it was back then Deichiberze was in a different building, but here, and I worked there, and that's exactly the situation where you can't touch, you can't even, you know, like remotely get there, right? Like I had like VPNs, virtual machines, just to reach a development environment where there is a dedicated team. But then your release cadence is like 3 months. That's it. Like, and then it goes to some environment where it's being tested. And so I think the deal actually is like you can split it if you have to split it, you split it, but then the price you pay is the speed of development, like how fast you get, because you need to get the feedback and so on. So there's like back and forth. And so that was quite funny because I did some changes, and after 6 months I got a bug report. It doesn't work the way it was expected because there was a performance degradation, right? And I was like, 6 months, what I was working on, like I don't remember, right? So I personally think that the you build it, you run it is good fit for environments when you want the fast feedback loop and you want to iterate fast. If that's not doesn't really benefit you much, then maybe consider something else.
Yeah, and from compliance point of view, every company who have, for example, US government, have exactly this problem that you cannot access the regions. Yeah? You have to have separate operators that are dedicated to that work, and they have special windows where they can go there and make, for example, that gap of there are physically divide regions. Yeah, you doesn't have internet there. You have to go to special place and make upload, for example, your release one per quarter or something that they don't ask you, just you deploy daily. Yeah, that's they doesn't care. Yeah, and exactly that's the issue. Yeah.
And the cost part, that's mostly about risk management, because most B2B SaaS companies typically have SLAs with their customers. And if you have a long downtime, then you need to return some money back to the customer, typically in the form of service credits. So you need to make a trade-off between paying money to the people who are on call for a given service and have all the context to fix it quickly, versus maybe having a smaller on-call group of people who don't have as much context, and it will probably take them much longer to restore the service. So also depending on how your SLA is or isn't tight, like if you are aiming for 4 nines, then typically having a dedicated on-call team per service is going to be much cheaper than dealing with the repercussions of not meeting the SLA.
Yeah, I did my napkin math, and we spare something like 5% of the personnel costs just only for the on-call compensation, just for imagination. In regards to question about legal and regulations, for example, one thing that you are hit, it's once you have customers around the globe, you will have to, for example, start solving issues like for example, your logs cannot leave the given region. So, for example, in our case, Ataccama, we will have to build 3 independent Grafana Elasticsearch monitoring stack just to ensure that that even the logs will not leave the particular region. But I would say that's a tax of doing global business.
We also have full auditing. So we are using Teleport for every production access. So you can see who seen what kind of data, which nodes they accessed, everything. So like even from the legal perspective, we are covered. And if customers ask like, hey, who accessed my data in production, we have the full audit log basically.
Another question?
I wanted to add the compliance, now my favorite topic.
Hey, apologies. I wanted to follow up on something that Vilda mentioned, the engagement patterns between SRE teams and development teams. I know that your companies have different approach to operations and who does that, but how do those teams engage with developers apart from on-call? How does that work, if that makes sense?
Who take questions?
Well, I can answer. It's not only during incidents that operations interacts with development. That would be really sad and bad. So yeah, of course, when they improve the infrastructure, they interact with development teams and vice versa. When development teams prepare something, they need to take into consideration like the operational aspects, which I think is one of the challenges in our teams actually, because sometimes you hire great programmers and all they care about is, I don't know, OOP or functional programming, things like that. But we really need to care about performance. And that's usually represented by people from the operations because they can see it. And obviously we're moving more metrics and charts and everything towards development, but it's in the nature more of the operations people, not the developers by nature.
Yeah, what I would say that it helped, I hope in our case, was that the prior setup was that the operations team reported to my peer, which also strengthened the idiom of the wall. And now we have the engineering team and the operations team reports to me. So my engineering directors from the operation teams and the engineering teams sits within one room or let's say, within one table with me. And like from the organization setup, I would say it's for me, it's like no-brainer having something different, like having all the people from the operations team and engineering team reporting to one person responsible for the boat, reporting and operations is the best setup that I can envision, or at least from my experience. I don't know how about you guys. If it's legally for sure possible.
I don't know if I've had something because like when you're a cloud provider, you're kind of like in the infrastructure business. So a lot of the people actually understand the infrastructure just because they're providing that service, right? So there, I think, like usually the deal is more on like who is sort of the first line of defense rather than anything else, and then maybe some rotations. And they kind of like very often what they own is the deployment process as well. Like they own it from like you write the code, you pass it, it passes some tests or something, and then we evaluate if you are willing to deploy it or not. So that's a pattern that I see very often, where there's a team actually that actually owns it from like passes integration tests. We take it, we'll see and evaluate if we push it to the production or not, right? Depending on our own metrics, because we are responsible for the running part, right?
I think that's a great point. We're in this setup, and I actually think it's sort of an anti-pattern. Like there is development, there's QA, there is operations. Everyone can stop it, can decide whether to deploy it or not, owning the release process. Like I would much rather see that some pipeline actually deploys it. It's not so easy with the kind of product we have, but certainly we should be striving for that.
Yeah, I think that's always useful if you have some canaries or blue-green that you exactly measure some relevant metrics, especially for customers as SLOs and SLI, and you can decide it. That's super good if you have this pipeline, but it's not easy to set up it. Do we have another questions?
Sure. Actually, I had a question for Dougie about the homework you were actually talking about with regards to moving the responsibilities from ops to the left. Is it to the right? Upwards and upwards to the right, right? Should be. Anyway. So I wonder where it starts and where it ends. I lived through Oracle and APRE and earlier as well, and I've never seen a perfect world. And there is a lot of stuff you could do with regards to hiring people, expecting doing that kind of job, like you mentioned. And you need to educate them. Who's educating them? How long does it take? What's your take on it?
Good question. So how long does it take it to make your homework before you jump on call? So we started this homework or the preparation for this shift left at the, I would say, fall last year, was something like October at least. Since that time we had, I don't know, 4 or 5 onboarding sessions, like for people, show them how can, where they find even monitoring, how they can, you know, touch the Kubernetes, etc. And we are still not ready even start on-call duties during business hours, because it's not natural way, like start with business hours, and then once we will be ready to let developers being on call during nights. So you see that it's a month-long journey, and I would say now we are at the moment when guys together review all the existing alerts, because we realize, okay, it doesn't make sense to put anybody on call if he would not be act on this alert somehow. So we literally miss the high level alerts. I mean, like on the level above the infrastructure, and the infrastructure still can be handled by the operations guys, which are, I don't want to call it let's say level 1, but something like that. Still some of the alerts coming from the infrastructure will be handled by the operations people because they are experts in Linux, etc. So months. From my journey, it's months, and our internal goal is having this on-call ready during March this year, and I would expect that we will be far away from even being not idle, but let's say at moderate state, what I would expect. You know, build this operational excellence, not operational, but observability excellence. It takes time. It will cause, I'm absolutely sure, some of the outages, etc. before we get the people get used to on what they need to build just to, you know, deliver on SLA, uptime, observability, you know, prevent problems getting bigger and bigger. So it's journey for years, and it will never be idle. And that's my personal experience back from good data time, zonky time, etc. It's the same story everywhere.
Like alerts, that's my favorite topic. Like I haven't like there are very few places where they didn't write. Up here was one of them, but to the most part, like now I can tell like there are teams that really suck at that because they basically are on so many things that, and they naturally have to ignore some because you can't just, you know, like alert fatigue and all this comes in, and if like everything blinks all the time, you just, you know, turn blind eye and you don't see that, right? So I rather see just one alert that tells you like it's down. Oh, cool. That's the most important one. The rest is nice to have, I would say. Like you can improve on that. That's my approach to it. But what I wanted to say was, I think one of the aspects that actually is missing very often, and I see that even in OCI, is designing the system so that actually it does the operations for you. Like, as in, oh, I'm delivering this feature XYZ, but what if most of the time people don't think like, how I'm going to deploy it so it's safely, right? Like schema migrations is a usual thing that's probably solved, I would say. And if not, then there's plenty of materials about that, so it's fine. But what about the rest? Like, you know, feature flags, not everybody's using them, but that's the thing you should do, like designing for running the thing, right? Also, not just like adding that feature, because, and that's what I've learned from you know, civil engineering, is actually that most of the time you spend it running rather than creating it. So think about how you're going to run it and what you need to maintain it, right? Like, for example, another quite great approach is like crash only software, right? Like, oh, if something goes down, I just crash and restart. I don't bother with handling that. That's an approach that actually works pretty well.
Yeah, for example, going back to your question, one of the blockers for us was like not a mindset of the people. That was one problem. But second problem, like more practical, was a database got stuck somehow, and the people naturally wanted to access to the database, which is a problem because of, you know, leaking data, etc. It's a legal problem because as part of our legal contracts, we say that just only, you know, very limited group of people has access to data. But have you ever guys tried to debug or troubleshoot database without any access to such a database? So here are this kind of the problems that you will reveal on the shift left of the responsibilities, and you need to somehow be ready for that.
May I ask, is this shift left like an industry standard term, or is it?
Shift left, okay. Yeah, it is. It's like part of because DevOps movement is like shifting operations, QA, testing, like on the left side, when left side is the let's say development part of the.
Yeah, I understand.
I think if you write it, on the left side is dev and on the right side is ops, so you're moving left.
Yeah.
Yes, and well, yes.
It wasn't like shift left because the engineering would sit there and operations there, but actually that's true. But like it's a industry there.
Yeah, that's used for CIs and staging and part. You are going there, and there are plenty of startups that are doing shifting left with some technologies. For example, with monitoring, more to developer side from production. Please.
Yeah, I have just a simple question. Since you mentioned that about the shift from left to right, or
Left.
just
Yeah,
the shift,
left.
and from the operations to well, just to DevOps, let's say. So, and shifting this part of responsibility from like whole process, like maintaining the services, deployment, and so on. So, could you please like a bit extend or share your thoughts about how do you then help developers to take care about the deployments? I mean, like because usually, for example, previously when I deploy some stuff, I don't care how it was deployed because I just built a binary, send it to the operations, and they do the magic. But then, sincerely, after some time, then after this shift, I need to do this. So, like, I know that there are some kind of things like tooling teams in like different companies, but could you please like share your experience in your companies? How do you help your developers, or basically how do you like share this experience from ops to developers?
It's super important to build a tooling around it, like not reinvent the wheel in every team, but have like a centralized tooling that will allow you to easily use things like feature flags, canary deploys, blueprint deployments. And in our case, we've actually built a platform engineering organization within engineering, and its mission is to provide those tools internally to other engineers to help them with those day-to-day tasks like deployment, debugging, running their own development environments. So we made intentional investment in making sure that we have those topics covered, and we've set up dedicated teams that own the tools, and they are supposed to operate like normal product teams. So yes, their customers are their colleagues, they are internal, but they are still supposed to understand the needs of the customers, collect the feedback and prioritize based on it. So that's an approach that I'd say works pretty well for us.
It's exactly the same with us. Like I consider it an engineering problem to build this pipeline. Eventually it ends up in production, but I think the release process is more like really a team project or tooling, things like that. So it's not purely operational problem. It's an engineering problem, in my opinion.
I just realized I actually work in such team. Now, I haven't thought about it because I was like, oh, we're developing these services. Well, actually, our customers are other teams. So that's the solution. And depends on scale, right? Like either if it's like, small company you're starting, off-the-shelf stuff most of the time works. Like especially if you jump on Kubernetes, there's plenty of tools which you can use and will work probably fine for you for like quite a bit of time. And then you start building a team that will actually like sort of create tools that will fit more your use cases you have and so on. For example, in our case, we are basically having like we build everything ourselves basically, because it's like there are so many different requirements like legal and from compliance perspective and who can do what and where it's tracked and where is audit trail and all this. So that basically means we're doing everything ourselves. And that's how I realized I'm actually in the platform engineering. I didn't know about it today.
That's the buzzword.
Yes.
Okay. Another question. I will distribute mic.
I would like to ask if this like shift left approach is some alternative, or if it's done by most of the industry. What I remember when you start up in Google as a developer, you get your own computer with Linux. You don't have your root password. You don't know Wi-Fi for password for local Wi-Fi because you have guys who organize it. And it was really like focus on one small goal, which is completely opposite of this. Like you build it, you code it, you run it. So I want to ask if you know if the biggest company are also shifting this to this wider approach?
You used to work for Google.
You
it's
work
okay.
for Google only.
I can comment. Well, I used to work at Google. It was 2010, 2011. So my experience might be super outdated. But back at the day, I was a part of an SRE team, and that definitely didn't follow the you build it, you run it attitude. We were more like a traditional operations team. So we would be doing all the deployments, we would be setting up the metrics, we would be on call for the system, we would be running the load tests, and we were actually the gatekeepers for deploying the production systems. So whenever there would be in your release, we would run a set of load tests and validate that it behaves correctly. And only then we would proceed with the rollout, obviously like super carefully. So we would do like a canary deploy to one cluster, then we will slowly ramp up the traffic and see if we are still meeting all the SLOs that we had, etc., etc. So that was definitely like a counterexample. But at the same time, we have companies like Amazon who preach the you build it, you run it approach. So I would say it varies. It depends on what you optimize for. Generally, I would say we are seeing the whole industry moving to this approach and shifting the responsibilities left for various reasons. But I think if you have specific use cases, specific scenarios, there are still other approaches which might be completely valid. I mean, I would never want to say that you build it, you run it is the only valid approach. There are sensible reasons for still doing it otherwise. And if you are Google and you are building like planet scale systems and your revenue pretty much depends on being up all the time and having like a 5-6 nines of availability, having a SRE team serving as a gatekeeper and being really focused on the availability and performance might still make a ton of sense.
And many companies from the regulatory reasons that we already mentioned doesn't have this approach, and they cannot have. Yeah, that's exactly what we mean. There was another question there. I will pass. Yeah.
But no, what were the reactions of that? Once you announce them, they will be involved into the controls.
That's a good question. That we announce new everyone will be on call in 3 months. What they said.
I can't tell because the deal was I was always on call or not at all. So I don't know.
We don't announce, we negotiate hard.
I recall that when we were with me and Stop at Good Data, and Gergely, the VP of Engineering, announced that the answer from the operation guy, back in time we had just only 2 operation guys, was that's a bullshit. We're not gonna do it. And that was the reaction, not from the engineers, but from the operation guys. But people, from my experience here from Ataccama, like people were scared, but were scared because they cannot imagine that. Like it was like,
Doesn't have
I don't know,
experience.
like they most of them haven't had any experience. So they were scared, like because of unknown.
Yeah, I think that fear from that experience, if you don't have, is very realistic, and you as manager you have to work with that, and that's quite important. And you have to understand that in Czech Republic we have law that you have to pay for,
Which many companies don't follow.
Exactly, that's different thing. But there are many countries they doesn't have it. For example, US. And I remember from Oracle, we joined and there was transition to that new cloud system, and that was guys that are working in Oracle for 20 years. They doesn't have on call, and their manager go there, and you are on call from next month for that, and they, oh, we don't know how to do it and all the things, and we, oh, okay, the guys from Prague will fly here, they will teach you how to do it, and we fly there and we was there 14 days, and I think that we teach them many things about what they're doing, but they don't get any money for that. Yeah, they are working much more harder and they doesn't have anything, and in 1-2 years they fire them almost everyone. Yeah, I think 2 guys are still on Oracle, what I remember, and that wasn't nice experience for them. That was quite frustrating for them, and I completely understand them. Yeah.
Also, what I think is super important is the commitment that if you are getting paged all the time, like every night, twice, you can stop shipping features and you can actually focus on stabilizing the system. That's why I think having metrics around the acceptable volume of alerts for on-call is important, and having the commitment that if you exceed a certain threshold, you will not let the people just suffer more, but you will actually start fixing the situation. So that's one thing. Second thing is compensation. I think it's natural for people to expect compensation for being on call because it worsens their quality of life. Here in Czech Republic, fortunately, it's even mandated by law, which is not the case everywhere, as Lada said, but I think it should be a part of the deal. And then third, as soon as you can, optimize for this during the hiring process, right? Because it should be a question as part of the hiring process. Can you be on call for a service if you join this particular team? Because that can also be a deciding factor whether you hire a person or not.
Yeah, maybe 2 psychological hacks or quick wins. The first one, I promise to people that there will be for sure anybody who can de-escalate during on call. So the escalation part has to be, established just to keep at least some level of safetiness. So if I don't know, I can escalate somewhere.
Can I escalate to you?
And that was the second promise. I promise guys that the engineering leadership will have the on-call with them. So there will be at least one engineering director or me on the on-call shifts, just to be sure that we not let them alone. And for me, that's just only for the reason of escalation, because sometimes you do some tough decisions like, okay, revert and backup. It might have reputation risk. It might have some data loss risk, and for such a reason, it's really good to having someone who is, let's say, higher exposed than you as an individual contributor.
I actually think that's a good point. That's a really important point, because like most of the time it's going to be fairly straightforward or should be fairly straightforward endeavor. But there are times where you basically have only bad options and you have to choose one, and they all impact business, and it's a business decision, not a technical decision. And at that point, like I, as an engineer, don't feel like I don't have the mandate to actually make that decision. So I get Larry on the call, say like, hey, Larry, what am I supposed to do? Basically,
for such a reason, you should know whether you impact on the high profile customer or someone.
Yes, go back to understanding the impact. Yes.
What do you need the rotation? And we even use the same tooling for engineering rotation and leadership rotation. So I have Ops Genie, I have it, on the watch, so I can actually get like leadership escalation alert anytime.
Yeah,
That's the same deal in our case.
We use PagerDuty.
We have our own system, which is worse than most of the mentioned one.
Yeah. And for that safety, that's always useful. That was why I put juniors on our on-call in API, that we have always the incident command rotation that was experienced people, always that safety net and people who help them to do it. And
yeah, by the way, guys, do you do game days, like simulating, failures, exercises, like, although you live it all the time, so you don't have to probably.
Well, we kind of like, but we actually do them. Like that's actually part of the compliance. We have to do it, right? The quality of that it depends, right? Like it's up to the teams to actually like decide like how thorough they want to be. But that's something that I think is very useful. It increases the confidence, and I actually know what I'm kind of doing, like where I look. like for example, what we started doing is part of the onboarding of the new engineers is now they get like a testing environment where they get random failures, like hey, and a page, and you solve it, and that's how you learn about all the systems. Like it's a gradual, like hey, now you figure out the problem, then you go and fix it in the code, and you deploy the code and do all these exercises, and that is something that has been reported like a super useful thing.
Yeah, we established in product board game days, and it was very useful for infrastructure team that I was there, or something. I think others team trying.
Yeah, we touched the topic at the beginning when we were talking about like rolling out on calls and making sure people are ready. I think game days are a crucial part of that, because that allows everybody to test all the tools and follow the process in a safe environment. And then when an incident actually happens, you already know what to do, and you are focusing on mitigating the issue rather than figuring out, hey, like, where do I start?
Yeah, exactly. We find for new technologies that you adapt, we, for example, adapt some processes about restoring our vault, HashiCorp vault, and we make some run books for that, and we run the game day, and we found exactly the gaps in run books, that the only team who write them understand them correctly, and other infrastructure team have some gaps, yeah, and we easily found during that game day and fill it, and it was much more better outcome from that.
By the way, game day is also industry standard like shift left. I wanted to say it's not my acronym.
Yeah, but are super expensive for me. That's you have to spend a lot of time on doing them and preparing them.
Unfortunately, we get enough real training. So.
Yeah, that's another way how to do it. Yeah.
Well, are you also accounting for like dropping tables in a database?
Sure. Yes, another question.
In the Vilibald some developer to deploy the infrastructure, because serverless technologies and something like this are very popular these days. So if you are planning your companies to give the developers ability to prepare all infrastructure, for example, with AI guys and stuff like GPU instances and what big clusters for this. So and the kind of operations are minded developer for them. So if you are planning something like this, the guys from the development are doing all the stuff, including the preparing the whole infrastructure. So
yeah, I understand that question, and I think that's common for you build it to run it. You have own infrastructure. You don't have operation guys. Yeah? And we follow that. And for example, in Pure Storage, we have the same. We have own infrastructure. We have some dedicated capacity that's owns for development. It's up to us run the Terraform and everything. I think similar.
Yeah, and again, you can probably have a platform team which takes care of governance over the Terraform, how you are supposed to use it, provide you with tooling, how you apply the changes, make sure you are not destroying, all the production resources by accident. These kind of things, but typically it would be up to the teams to write their own Terraform manifest or like whatever manifest and provision their infrastructure.
So the platform team is taking care of the security and the stuff is important.
I think it actually sort of sets you guardrails so you don't shoot yourself in the foot easily. I think that, well, that's at least what we do. Is we let the teams do what they need to do. They know the best what they need to do. It's not us, but we know things that will down the line cause problems. We don't allow them to do that. And if they need it, like, okay, escalate to us and we will talk to see, like, do you really have a good reason? Or maybe there's a knowledge gap. And I think that's basically it. Like it's putting guardrails around that so you can do your thing safely.
Also, you can, for instance, keep an eye on the cost. So in our case, if you make any changes to Terraform, it will show you, okay, this is how much more money it's going to cost us on AWS resources. Or if you try to destroy or like nuke a production database, it will tell you, hey, this is probably not what we want to do.
for example, I wouldn't allow that without the trails that Wilda mentioned, for example, because of the governance, cloud cost, security, etc. I would believe that the people has the best motivation to use the services, but there are consequences that they may even don't know that should anticipate. So for me, it's really dangerous without any trials.
So I'll be a bit different. Our infrastructure team owns the infrastructure mostly. So we are not in a public cloud. So most of the infrastructure is actually handled by the specialized team, and development teams use it, but they don't own it in our case. So.
Questions for this company where developers can deploy their own code. Who decide which team gets how much resources?
That's a good point. For instance, at Google, at our scale, we had to really keep a close eye on how much money we spend. So teams were actually buying quota for the resources for CPU, memory, disk capacity, and it was like real money. It was all expressed like in a real dollar value. At Project Board, we are at a much smaller scale, so we don't have anything like this. We have visibility into how much money the teams are spending. So all the resources we have the tags, labels, and we can account every single dollar, down to the team level. But we don't have any governance model saying how much every team can spend. But what we do is that we have a metric which we call cost per maker, which would be essentially like cost per seat, and we try to keep that at an acceptable level across the whole engineering. So we are monitoring the metric really closely. And if it looks like we will go over the limit that we've set for ourselves, then we start reviewing the cost more carefully and see where we should be making the optimizations.
I have a team structure question. So, everybody says like, let's, you build it, you run it, developers. But I'm an inclusive person, so I consider even front-end developers. So my question is like, when you have people who don't necessarily have the ability and skill set close to infrastructure or like essential backend development, how do you handle it? Like, are they off the hook? Do they have another role in the collaboration? Like, how does that work in your companies?
Well, actually, my background is in front-end development, and today I would say that maybe running the front-end is maybe easier than backend because you have so many nice services like Verso, Netlify, Cloudflare. It's really quite easy. Historically, like when the front-end was generated by some server-side language, you had to run it, maybe your monolith or things like that. You needed to deploy to your servers, things like that. But today you can actually deploy JavaScript frontends to many compelling platforms, and that in our case makes it much easier. Actually, the platform we trust, like you trust services like Cloudflare that they just run. We don't really have this sort of issues. You obviously after release you watch all the metrics, and there can be problem like in your code, but not in the infrastructure. It's just such a small, chance of this happening that only backend teams are really concerned about this hosted on our infrastructure. These cloud services are really amazing today.
So for OCI, for example, there's a large difference in the scale. They have their own services and they have on-call for their stuff. And sometimes their stuff breaks because they kind of need to own the CDN part. Like, oh, it's not being delivered. Why it's not being delivered? It's not any service team. It's actually the team delivering the front end is responsible for delivering it. Oh, they have an easy job because most of the CDNs work most of the time. But if they don't, it's them who get paged.
Okay, thanks everyone. We are more than an hour, and I will stop our discussion, and we can enjoy networking with our audience. Thanks everyone that joined us. Thanks our host, thanks our audience, and follow us on You Build It, You Running podcast. You found us on every platform. Thanks.